Alright, I just got back from seeing Suzume in theaters. This is the new Makoto Shinkai epic. Full disclosure, if you haven't been following me for a while, I haven't had the most, high opinion of Shinkai for the past, 4 years or so. I liked 5 centimeters per second when I saw it, a decade ago. And I thought Voices of a Distant Star was okay, but I watched Your Name 4 years ago and I absolutely hated it, which might be my most controversial hot take. So I had fairly low expectations going in to this one, but you know what? I think my Shinkai hater arc might be over because this movie slaps something fierce. This is a lot. This movie is a lot, both in terms of the amount of ideas that it crams in and just the amount of genre it crams in. This is basically a summer blockbuster of sorts. It's this big action-adventure, road trip, romance, family trauma, drama, supernatural, giganto thing that is all basically a metaphor for coming to terms with the Tohoku earthquake. Which might sound familiar if you've seen Your Name, because that movie was also that. But I think there's a very notable distinction to make there. Whereas Your Name was basically how people come together in response to disaster, if I'm remembering Your Name correctly, and how disaster affects people directly in the moment. Suzume is much more about the after effects of disaster, how much what this disaster does to you in the future, the memories it leaves you with, the trauma that it leaves you with. And this was also something that I talked about last year with The House of the Lost on the Cape, which I thought did not do that very well because it didn't look very good and all the characters were super boring. But I would say Suzume does that significantly better. This was just, if you ever seen that clip from, it's from an Adult Swim sketch or something, it's that guy who says, "I know writers who use subtext and they're all cowards." That's this movie. This is just, no subtext at all. This is no longer a metaphor. This is just, we are talking directly about 3/11 and the scars that it has left on the Japanese populace. And it is just so incredibly powerful for that. And I am, it's just, there was some stuff in the third act of this film that just had me almost bawling. I was definitely tearing up near the end of this film with just how very simple but very raw some of the imagery and some of the ideas that it presents are. And I think the ideas that it comes up with on how we address that trauma, how we get over basically some of these characters have just had their lives completely reset because of this, and the way that it sort of gets over it through this very thinly veiled supernatural metaphor, I think is a very healthy and very emotionally cathartic way to process that trauma. I don't want to give away too much. I kind of already gave away a lot, but I think in order to properly understand this movie, I think you kind of need to go in knowing this is Makoto Shinkai doing the Makoto Shinkai thing again. Obviously, you probably already expected that. It's a supernatural disaster movie that has romance subtext to it. It's a Shinkai film. And normally I would hate him for that. That's what I usually hate Shinkai for. It's what I hate Your Name for, because I didn't think it did it very well. But this one, I think it did it a lot stronger. Despite the fact that I don't think the characters are significantly more interesting than they were in Your Name. I would say they're probably around the same level, but what I like about this movie as opposed to Your Name, I think I liked the chemistry between the two leads a lot more than in Your Name. I just did not buy the romance at all in Your Name. I just didn't. And despite how quickly Suzume and this mysterious, very sexy guy, Sota, suddenly just get thrown together in this supernatural confuckery. Despite that, I think that the dialogue that they share, the way that they sort of lean on each other as the movie goes on, the trials that they go through, the trauma that they suffer together, I can definitely see how a romance blossoms out of that. And I very much bought that, despite the fact that, like, in the first act, I really didn't think either of these characters were particularly interesting, but it really was that chemistry that they shared, that dialogue, that made them so compelling, and what actually made me want the happy ending for this film of sorts. Again, not giving away what happens in the third act of this film, but it is wild. Speaking of wild, I think this is another thing I really appreciated about this film, is a lot of it is just kind of silly, but it just goes, like, all in on it without even, like, a wink or a nod to the camera whatsoever. Like, if you've seen the trailer, you know it's in the trailer. A hot guy gets turned into a chair by a talking cat. There's a lot more details behind that, but they just sort of run with that. There's no, like, oh, geez, isn't that weird, like, every 10 minutes or so. They just kind of, like, there's something so sincerely earnest about it that I very much appreciated. And that really helped with the immersion, I guess, with how really silly some of these concepts were, and I really appreciated that. Not a whole lot else to talk about in terms of, like, plot or theming or anything. The side cast was kind of nice. It really fleshed out a lot of the, like, this is how we've dealt with the disaster, and also just, like, it kind of expounds out, especially in, like, the first half of the film, it really expounds out to, like, just memories on the whole, and what role memories serve in our lives, how we relate to the past, how, like, some elements of the past are kind of lost to us. And that really helped, like, make these side characters kind of stand out and just be very enjoyable for, like, the brief time that they are on screen. So yeah, story elements pretty solid, and visual elements pretty solid, which you probably would expect, since Shinkai has developed this reputation for being, like, so hyper detailed and extremely beautiful with his animation. Truth be told, that's another problem that I personally have with Shinkai. I think his art is very detailed and very, like, colorful and very, like, well composed, but there's something that, on the whole, Shinkai never leaves a lot of impact with me. And I think I've figured out what it is with this film, seeing this film finally, is that nothing ever stops moving. Like, almost until, like, the very, like, third act, when it really, like, slows down for the big emotional climax. Nothing ever just stops moving like you're used to in anime. Their limited animation is out the window on this one. This is a very fluid, very animated movie. And if you're into that, cool. This is going to be your jam. But I do think it takes away from the impact that anime is known for. Those really impactful still frames that you see in like some other works. And I was kind of hoping for some of that there, but that's not really Shinkai's style at this point. And I don't like hate it. I don't think like this is like an awful thing. It's just something I would have wished for from the movie. But again, the end, it's a very pretty film. There's nothing like ugly about this except maybe the CG. There's a lot of very obvious CG in this film. It never like completely took me out of the moment, but there were like so many like very obvious like set builds. Every time someone's in a car, like 90% of the shot is CG and it's super obvious. And it's not the worst thing ever, but it is noticeable. But I very much need you to understand that I am the hot take guy when it comes to how Makoto Shinkai films look. That is just I want to lay it on real thick that is my personal take on it. Because I know a lot of people will not agree with me. So, just going to throw that out there. What I can say wholeheartedly, I very much enjoyed with like no qualms whatsoever, is the soundtrack. This soundtrack goes so fucking hard, really carries a lot of the moments that might have otherwise just been okay. And apparently the composer was, what's his name? Kazuma Jinochi, I think was his name, who is apparently one of the composers for Halo 4, which is weird. But yeah, this soundtrack fucking slaps. There's just, like, most of it is just gigantic orchestral numbers that are just loud and bombastic and incredibly moving. And I love that shit. But there was also like this one kind of jazzy track early on in the film during like one of the first chase sequences that just really got the energy going and really like kicked this film into high gear. And that's another thing about this film is it just goes. There's like up until like the emotional resolution and like maybe like the twist right before the third act. There's not much downtime in this film. It is just going. The pacing in this film is incredible. That's why I think of it as like a summer blockbuster. It is just non-stop, always on, and I really appreciate that. On top of all the ideas that it throws in about memory and loss and trauma, on top of all the genre ideas that it puts together, this was a really damn solid film. Bravo, Shinkai. I'm back on board. I'm feeling like a strong 7, probably a light 8 on this one, maybe even a decent 8. Somewhere around there. I'm thinking a light 8 on this one. Characters could have been a little bit more interesting, but they were incredibly serviceable and very engaging on a chemistry level. So yeah, go see this film. I don't know if it's going to make as much money as Your Name will, but one can hope. So yeah, that's what I think about Suzume. Not sure what the next film that's coming out is. I know G-Kids just advertised something like the Mirror Castle or whatever. Sentai was supposed to put out that new studio clap film, Tunnel to Summer, but that never came about. So who knows what will happen next. Maybe it'll be another movie. Maybe I'll finally catch up on 2 whole seasons of anime that I'm behind on. Who knows? But if you want to see more of this, be sure to like and subscribe, do all the YouTube shit. My name is Ember, and I'll see you next time.